Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot onto warm flagstones at the edge of a garden that shouldn't exist, at least not here. Not in this heat. You're in the middle of the Iranian plateau. And the air is doing something it absolutely should not be doing, it's cooling you. Gently, silently, as if the wind itself were trained in manners. Olive trees rustle. Water gurgles somewhere close but unseen. The walls around you, made of thick clay and faded tile, trap the wind and twist it, turning it into soft spirals that brush your cheeks and nudge your eyelids toward sleep. Jasmine clings to the air like a polite ghost. You walk toward the sound of water. You still don't see it. That's intentional. These gardens weren't made to show off. They were made to work like puzzles for your senses. One step smells like lavender. The next smells like damp moss and copper. You follow the scent, not the sight. Of course, you probably wouldn't survive here. Not because it's dangerous. Far from it, but because living in this garden requires patience, stillness, and the ability to enjoy 6 different kinds of silence before breakfast. Also, you'd need a working knowledge of celestial irrigation scheduling. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is. I love knowing where you all drift off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit on a worn stone bench as the first stars peek above the garden wall. To your left, a low mud brick building rises with its curious crown, a tall, narrow tower sliced open like a citrus fruit. That, dear guest, is a windcatcher. It's not decorative, it's engineering. That little open mouth at the top drinks in the breeze, gulps it down the vertical shaft, and delivers it to the rooms below, cooled and cleaned like a minty breath. The garden you're in tonight could be in Kashan, or Yazd, or Shiraz. The specifics blur after a while because they all follow the same sacred logic. Enclosure, water, shade, fragrance, geometry. Repeat. Persian gardens were less about wild beauty and more about showing how nature could be persuaded, gently, persistently, and mathematically. The word for garden in Persian is paradisa, which you might recognize, in a sleepy sort of way, as the root of the word paradise. These weren't metaphors, they were models. Paradise, on earth, drawn with brick paths and grapevines. You shuffle past a pomegranate tree older than your great-grandmother's sarcasm. Its limbs have been tied and coaxed over the years into something almost architectural. A small clay pot, half sunk into the ground, leaks cold water onto its roots. This is not irrigation as you know it. There are no hoses, no sprinklers. Here, water moves like a whisper. And it's usually invisible, beneath your feet, long before the first sandal ever graced the tile. Someone dug tunnels, miles of them. They're called qanats, subterranean aqueducts that guide water from distant mountain snowmelt into this hot, impossible haven. You never hear the water until it wants to be heard. Usually, it appears at just the right moment in a channel carved into marble, trickling quietly past a tea set no one remembers placing there. Historians still argue whether the earliest Persian gardens were originally designed as metaphysical diagrams, political statements, or just really nice places to nap. The truth is probably yes to all three. It's hard to separate theology from thermodynamics when it's 42 degrees outside and a breeze just came out of the wall. You pass under an archway of trained vines and arrive in a smaller courtyard. The tiles here are blue, cooler to the eye, even if the temperature is the same. A nightingale sings from a perch near the water channel. It doesn't sing loudly. It doesn't need to. There's no need for grandeur here. Persian gardens have no fountains shooting water into the air. That would be wasteful, showy. Instead, you get trickles, channels, rills. Sometimes, water drips from the ceiling in fine lines like pearl necklaces. Sometimes, it sits in shallow pools designed to reflect the moon just right, so it appears to float in your tea. A little boy with no name and a handful of mint leaves offers you a cup of rose water. He vanishes just as quickly. Maybe he wasn't real. That's fine. Neither are most things in paradise. You lie back, your head against a cushion of tightly packed wool. The stars above the windcatcher begin to turn. You wonder who designed this. Not just the building, the breeze, the scent, the silence. You open your eyes just a little wider. Above you, the stars shift slowly in their lanes. Not in chaos but in choreography. Even the cosmos feels like it's been designed with a draftsman's compass tonight. You sit up and start walking again. Slippers soundless on the mosaic tile. Around you, the garden opens like a scroll, lined with cypress trees standing still as sentries. Bordered with crushed rose petals. And pathways so symmetrical you start to wonder if you're part of a painting. But this isn't just landscaping. This is philosophy. Geometry wasn't a decoration to Persian garden designers. It was the language of perfection. You trace your steps along a square plot of herbs. It's one quadrant of a 4-part layout called Shahar Bagh. Literally, 4 gardens. That pattern, 2 paths crossing at right angles, dividing a space into 4 equal parts, is the ancient blueprint. It appears in the Quran as a vision of paradise and then, more importantly, in royal backyards. And here's the part you weren't taught in school. These gardens weren't actually designed by the kings whose names are carved into the stones. The truth, as always, is in the footnotes and the foot soldiers. Or in this case, the court eunuchs, Sufi poets, artisan guilds, and quietly brilliant hydraulic engineers. The big names got the inscriptions. The little names got the work done. You stop by a clay bench shaded by grapevines. In the corner sits a faded inscription in Persian script, curling like vines. It's not a royal decree. It's a shopping list, possibly for lime, mortar, and fennel bulbs. Garden records rarely survive because they weren't considered glorious enough. But without them, there's no breeze, no coolness, no calm. One designer, long forgotten by name but nicknamed the man with the copper trowel, was responsible for the first garden in Kashan that included both a windcatcher and underground chill room for storing pomegranate wine. Did he write his own praises in poems? No, but he left behind angled vents and shadowed courtyards that still make the midday heat feel like a passing mood. Historians still debate whether these forgotten garden builders were slaves, employees, or something fuzzier, lifetime-bound artisans who lived and died by their trade. Honored in private and omitted in public. What we do know, their knowledge passed hand to mouth, father to son, or master to apprentice, and their secrets weren't guarded like gold, they were too niche for theft. Who's going to steal your method for curving wind into a corridor? Well, Europeans, but we'll get to that. A breeze picks up, not sudden, just inevitable. That's how it's supposed to feel. These gardens were never meant to shout. Their power lies in the fact that they make you forget you're in a desert. They trick you kindly, like an old friend who always shows up with an extra chair and some cool fruit. You pass by another tiled alcove and notice the motif: interlocking stars, tiny cypress trees, and a lion that looks suspiciously relaxed. You run your fingers across the glazed edge. Even the artwork seems to breathe slower here. In one garden, long since lost to time but remembered in a 15th-century travel journal, the architect was a woman. Her name is erased, of course, but the design remains in faded ink. A crescent-shaped orchard with built-in shadow dials that told you when to nap and when to water the basil. Her employer? Likely a timorous prince with a tendency to faint in the heat. Her solution? A hidden wind corridor cooled by 2 qanats that crossed under a grape arbor. You smile, not just because it's clever, but because it worked. You sit in a copy of her design now, one of thousands modeled on that idea. A place where wind gets caught, cooled, slowed, and served, like tea, like poetry, like grace. A cat slinks by. You don't startle. The cat seems to know the path better than you do. Maybe it was born here. Maybe it remembers that woman's hands, laying out the stones in moonlight, choosing angles not for defense, but for breeze and sleep. And you follow that cat, like a dream, into the next shadowed pathway. The garden design still unfolding around you. Mathematically soft, quietly deliberate, like the breath you didn't realize you were holding. The cat leads you into a narrow corridor, shaded by trellised vines and draped linen. The light changes here, it's dappled, shy. You could be walking inside a thought. Somewhere beyond the wall, water still gurgles, but it's not demanding your attention. Instead, your ears tuned to smaller sounds, the scratch of claws on tile, the slow creak of wood as a shutter catches the breeze, the gentle drop of a fig from a tree that decided it was time. This is where the real designers lived, not in palaces, but in these back corridors, working with the sun like a stubborn coworker. Most people know the names of kings. But here's a secret. The real shapers of these gardens often didn't have names recorded at all. Not because they weren't important, but because importance looked different back then. You come upon a doorway carved into thick mud brick, slightly warped by time, just tall enough for you to duck. Inside is a workroom, not preserved. This isn't a museum, but lived in. A curved bench along one wall holds worn tools, copper trowels, wooden water levels, parchment rolls so brittle they probably sigh if you touch them. There's a smell of wet earth and saffron glue. And someone's sandals are still here. You pause. You've entered the mind of a designer. Not a draftsman with blueprints, but a sensory cartographer. Someone who measured wind with strips of cloth and timed sunlight by its heat on the back of the hand. You see a diagram on the wall, half faded. It's a garden layout, but not one of grandeur. It's for a small courtyard. 4 trees, a tiny water channel, and one corner marked with a symbol that looks suspiciously like a sleeping mat. Historians still debate whether garden designers of the Timurid and Safavid periods were seen as artisans, engineers, or mystics. The answer, naturally, is yes. A good Persian garden wasn't just about making things grow. It was about making people forget they lived in a world full of dust, bureaucracy, and camel dung. You spot a collection of sealed jars. One contains fine crushed tile, the same hue as the garden pool you just passed. Another holds dried jasmine buds. A third contains ash, maybe from a fire, maybe ceremonial. On the shelf above is a book. Well, not quite a book, more of a stack of bound papers, full of garden poems, notes on water pressure, and a short treatise on the spiritual behavior of rose hedges. You laugh quietly, then louder. Because this is the exact kind of person who would spend 4 weeks calculating the correct angle for moonlight to fall across a lime tree during Nowruz. And also write a side note about a turtle that kept eating his mint. And that's the truth of these designers. They weren't grand. They were meticulous, sometimes petty, often exhausted, and deeply obsessed with comfort. There's a tiny charcoal sketch on the back wall. 2 men arguing over whether a pomegranate tree should lean 5 degrees to the left for aesthetic balance or stay straight for spiritual harmony. One of them is wearing a ridiculous hat. You have no doubt this argument took place, and possibly escalated into a week-long silent treatment. Another note, pinned to the wall, reads, "Water too loud. Adjust real curve." It's that kind of detail that reminds you. These people designed with the senses in mind. Not just sight, but sound, scent, and skin temperature. The water should murmur, not chatter. The breeze should brush, not slap. The sunlight should dapple, not blaze. Everything had its place. You step back out into the open air. The garden seems quieter now, as if it's listening. You look around with fresh eyes, realizing that every turn of the path, every flower bed, every shade cast by the trees was placed not just for beauty, but for rhythm, for breathing. Persian gardens weren't just made to be walked through. They were made to be exhaled. As you move down the next path, the air shifts. A wind rises, not strong, but present. It moves across your neck like a sigh from the designer who sketched this space 500 years ago. You can almost hear him mutter, "Finally." It works. The breeze strengthens, not dramatically, just a little firmer, like a sleepy hand guiding you through the next part of the story. You follow it instinctively, turning down a wider path where the gravel crunches more softly, like it's been walked by 1,000 bare feet before yours. Ahead, rising above the low rooflines of mud brick homes and ochre-colored domes, are the famous Windcatchers of Yazd. Tall, slender towers with open mouths at their tops, angled like sails frozen in mid-turn. From a distance, they look like watchtowers. Up close, they're even more interesting because they don't keep watch. They keep you cool. These towers, called badgers in Persian, are masterpieces of passive engineering. No electricity, no motors, just the kind of genius that starts with staring at a desert for years and muttering, "There's got to be a better way." You step inside one of the structures. Immediately, the temperature drops. Not by much, maybe 5 degrees, but enough to make you pause. The Windcatcher channels the desert breeze downward into the room using clever air pressure and the difference between hot and cool zones. Sometimes, it pulls air across an underground pool of water, adding humidity and turning the whole space into what's essentially a 14th century air conditioner. If it were any more chill, it would ask you what zodiac sign you are. Historians still argue whether windcatchers evolved independently in different parts of Persia or were imported from older Babylonian designs. Some even point to Egypt. But Yazd took them to another level. The city is full of them, each slightly different, each adapted to the owner's sense of comfort and ego. The taller the windcatcher, the cooler your reputation, literally. But it wasn't all about one big tower. The trick was in the placement, the angle, the direction. Designers often camped in an empty garden plot for days, watching how the wind behaved. They tied ribbons to sticks. They tossed fine powder in the air and tracked where it settled. One famously obsessive designer, known only as the wind listener, once slept on the ground for 3 nights to find the exact spot where the breeze kissed the earth at dusk. And what did he do with that knowledge? He put a bench there. That was the whole plan. You find one such bench now, carved from polished stone, still faintly cool. It sits under a window with intricate latticework, angled to frame the mountain range in the distance. But more importantly, it's in the direct path of the wind. You sit, you feel it, steady, dry, kind. The windcatcher above you isn't doing anything loud, just breathing for the building. And for you. Another nearby structure uses multiple shafts, allowing warm air to rise while cool air gets pulled in. One tower faces the prevailing wind, the other faces away, creating suction. It's like the whole house is exhaling stress. You notice a small plaque tucked near the base of the wall. The writing is faded but legible. It's not a quote from a king or a philosopher. It's a reminder to the housekeeper. Dust the vent screens after each sandstorm, or the breeze will complain. Even the servants knew. Wind has opinions. You rise again, and the path leads you to a small courtyard where apprentices once trained. The young designers weren't given textbooks. They were handed a cup of rose water and told to listen to the heat. That meant watching how shadows shifted on different wall textures, how the scent of marjoram changed when the water channel bent, how the same garden at dawn felt completely different from the one at dusk. You pause at a windcatcher base where an opening leads to the underground storage room. It's dark, but not ominous, just a little cooler. Here, families once stored fruit, cheese, dried herbs. Sometimes even sleeping mats were brought down here during the hottest months. The walls are plastered smooth, the air still carrying the scent of clay and thyme. You wonder how long it took to get the airflow just right. How many nights the designer returned, adjusted a vent, shifted a shutter, waited for the breeze to say yes. Above you, the windcatcher hums softly. It has no voice, but you swear it's whispering a lullaby that's been swirling around these towers for centuries. You step out into the light again, blinking. The garden beyond welcomes you like a quiet friend holding open the door to a nap. You follow the softest path, powdery earth underfoot, marked faintly with boot heel indentations so old they've started to look like part of the garden design. Overhead, branches of bitter orange arch together, just enough to break the sun. And somewhere nearby, water whispers. Not water gushing, not a waterfall or a clumsy fountain. Just the rhythmic murmur of a narrow stream moving through marble channels. You stop, look down. There it is, a rill, barely wider than your hand, carved precisely to run alongside the walkway. It doesn't ask for attention. It earns it. This is no accident. Persian garden designers knew the power of silence. And they knew how to control water like a conductor with a very sleepy orchestra. This gentle gurgling isn't just for beauty, it's engineered. Tiny changes in gradient alter the tone. The flow curves at just the right points to avoid splashing. Too much noise would wake you. This is a lullaby made of limestone and melted snow. You crouch to examine the channel more closely. At one point, it bends around a corner and disappears beneath the path, only to emerge again on the other side with a slight burble of greeting. You notice the water smells faintly of copper and herbs, like someone dropped in a sprig of thyme and forgot about it 2 dynasties ago. This is Qanat water, brought from underground tunnels that were dug with astounding patience. Some qanats stretch for miles beneath the earth, sloping ever so slightly from mountain sources toward thirsty cities. Digging them was a feat of math, muscle, and maybe masochism. You try hauling dirt through candlelit tunnels for months while crouched like a shrimp and tell me you don't start questioning your life choices. Historians still argue whether qanats originated in Persia or were imported from earlier Mesopotamian civilizations. But it's Persia that perfected them, folding them not only into farming but into the delicate art of leisure. You trail your fingers along the edge of the channel. The stone is warm on top, cool just beneath. In some gardens, the channels were shaped to guide the breeze as well, forming long, narrow corridors of evaporative air. That's not just plumbing. That's poetry with a drainage plan. Further along, the channel widens into a shallow basin lined with blue tiles, some chipped, some new. You pause beside it and watch the reflection of a tree's leafless arms ripple across the surface like an old man stretching in a hammock. Birds land on the edge, sip quickly, and dart off again, like they know they're part of a scene someone designed centuries ago. You lie on a nearby stone bench shaded by mulberry leaves. Water chuckles quietly beside you. The scent in the air shifts, a mix of wet earth and dried lime peel. Somewhere close, maybe hidden inside one of the alcoves, someone is boiling herbs for tea. A memory floats by, not yours, but the garden's. A prince once fell asleep right where you're lying now, lulled by the sound of this same water. When he woke, he issued a decree that no one should walk too loudly on this path ever again. Whether that decree was enforced is another story. But the water still flows in that same hushed register, as if honoring the memory out of habit. You open your eyes and trace the path of the rill as it winds past you and vanishes into a patch of dense foliage. You imagine the designer, centuries ago, standing exactly here with a chalk line and a spirit level made from goat bladder and gravel, muttering to himself about excessive gurgling. It's easy to forget that this gentle world was created through trial, error, and mild obsession, that someone cared enough to argue over the noise level of water. You begin walking again, slower now, letting the water walk beside you. The two of you are old friends now, moving in the same direction, at the same pace, saying very little. And you realize, in this garden, water doesn't move fast because it doesn't have to. Like you, it's exactly where it's supposed to be. You move deeper into the garden, where the shade thickens and the air changes again, just slightly, but enough that you notice. The scent becomes sweeter. You catch hints of crushed basil, fading rose petals, a trace of sweet fig warmed by sunlight. The sound of water has softened, almost like it's stepping aside to let something else speak. You come to a square clearing, perfectly symmetrical. At its center, a pool so still it looks like a pane of glass. Around it, neat rows of flowers and herbs, arranged with the obsessive balance of someone who probably alphabetized their spice rack before spices existed. This is not random beauty. This is sacred geometry. The layout, the angles, the division into fours, all based on the Shahar Bagh design. Again, but here, it takes on a new depth. Each quadrant hosts not just flowers but layers of meaning, scent, symbolism, shade. This garden wasn't just for walking, it was for contemplating paradise. And maybe impressing visiting diplomats with your lavender game. Historians still debate whether Persian gardens were literal depictions of Quranic paradise, or if that's just a poetic overlay added centuries later. The earliest examples don't have much religious inscription. But the design? The design practically prays. You kneel at the edge of the pool. Its border is tiled in a pattern of 8 pointed stars and creeping vines. The water reflects not just the sky, but the geometry above. Even the heavens seem symmetrical from this angle. A leaf floats across the surface, drifting lazily toward the corner where water disappears in silence. In one quadrant, the herbs are arranged by scent strength, from sharpest to faintest. Mint, then savory, then marjoram, then sweet violet. Each one steps back so the next can whisper. In another quadrant, flowers bloom in order of time, early risers like crocus, midday show-offs like hibiscus, and twilight closers like night-blooming jasmine. This is not landscaping. This is choreography. A gardener once wrote a guide on this, how to stage fragrance like music, with each plant delivering its note in harmony. He also mentioned, very briefly, a squirrel that kept rearranging his saffron bulbs, which he took personally, deeply personally. You laugh softly to yourself. Because of course, behind every perfect design is someone slightly on the edge of losing it because the squirrels won't stop moving the iris rhizomes. You stand and stretch, the scent rising with you. Somewhere above, A breeze threads through the trees again, cooler than before. It carries the faint perfume of orange blossom and baked clay. You follow it down another path. This next section of the garden is shadier, more private. Stone columns line the path. And overhead, wooden lattices support trained vines that sway in the wind, casting dancing shadows on the tile below. You pass a cluster of white roses that smell like apricots, and a vine of wild thyme climbing stubbornly up a wall that was clearly not part of the plan. Here, the geometry becomes intimate, more hidden. Subtle shifts in path angle. A tiny bump in elevation. A wall that seems too short until you realize it's framing the moon. These weren't accidents. They were decisions. Designers treated this as spiritual architecture, sacred without being a shrine. The garden was a place where beauty wasn't just visual. It was sensory, emotional, maybe even moral. A reminder that paradise was not about grandeur, but balance. One particularly poetic planner, whose name has mostly vanished except for a scribbled note in a crumbling garden ledger, once claimed that each petal is a mirror to the soul, and every shadow a reply to the sun. Which sounds lovely until you realize he probably also once fired a gardener for pruning a fig tree on the wrong lunar day. This level of detail wasn't performative. It was devotional, a daily act of honoring time, wind, space, and water. If a pebble was out of place, it was gently nudged back, not because someone might notice, but because the garden might feel it. You pause at the next corner. The breeze has grown sleepy. The water, hushed. The fragrance, settled. Around you, the garden seems to breathe, not for you. Not with you, but near you. Companionable. You close your eyes, just for a second, and in the quiet, you almost hear the designer whisper, This is the right angle." You find yourself walking along a tiled corridor. Its walls decorated with glazed panels, some pristine, others faded by sand and sun. They tell no great epics. No battle scenes or coronation triumphs. Just trees. Lots of trees. Pomegranate, apricot, almond. It's a quiet hint that this isn't a garden of ideas alone. It's a garden of appetites. Because now you've reached the royal section, where shade met strategy and banquets took on the air of performance. Not the loud kind, no trumpets, no clashing goblets. This was elegance under apricot trees, where the real contest was who could eat the most chilled melon without appearing impressed. To your left, a low platform sits nestled between two gnarled mulberries. The stone table is still there, its surface worn smooth by centuries of elbows and sugared fingers. You imagine a summer evening in the 16th century, a prince reclining on embroidered cushions. A tray of candied rose petals at his side, nodding politely while poets recite odes to nightingales. Across from him, courtiers pretend to listen while secretly evaluating whose melon slice was cut thicker. The real power here wasn't held in court, it was held in the garden. Quiet alliances were made over bowls of chilled yogurt with mint. Marriages were arranged under the vines. And once, apparently, a vizier lost his job for falling asleep during dessert. Historians still argue whether these garden feasts were political tools or just elite pastimes with suspiciously convenient side benefits. Most likely, they were both. If you wanted to whisper a dangerous idea, best to do it beside a trickling channel of cool water. Under the excuse of admiring a peony, you approach a low fountain in the center of a shaded clearing. It's not large, but the pool is just deep enough to reflect the sky and just shallow enough to chill a copper bowl of cherries. A few are still there, placed by a gardener reenacting some past meal. Or maybe just because the tree was feeling generous today. The breeze here doesn't just cool, it carries smell. Spiced fruit, simmered dates, and somewhere nearby, saffron-steeped rice. You're not hungry, but your mouth waters all the same. This garden was built for such confusion. A fragment of an old text comes to mind. In it, a garden steward outlines his duties for the prince's annual feast. They include sweeping the tiled path with rosewater, timing the candlelight with moonrise, and reminding guests to sit in silence between bites to better appreciate the layered moods of melon. You try to picture how seriously that was taken. Probably very. One false crunch at the wrong time and you'd be banned from fig season. Nearby, a set of steps leads up to a slightly raised pavilion, open air, with fine woodwork and cushions still fluffed in the shape of last week's guests. You climb them slowly and sink into a soft corner where the air stirs gently. The kind of air that understands timing. You look out over the garden, paths branching like verses in a poem. Trees placed not just for fruit but for privacy. Even the servants' quarters are tucked behind hedges of jasmine. Out of sight, but always nearby. Service was silent here. Food arrived like a breeze. Wine like a suggestion. You spot a small carving on the underside of the table, barely visible unless you're slouched like a bored aristocrat. It's a fig leaf. Beneath it, a short line. The apricots bloom late this year. No name, just a gardener's note. Or maybe a joke, maybe both. These feasts weren't just about indulgence. They were about mastery of environment. Cooling fruit without ice. Hosting a banquet without sweat. Making your rival eat sour plums while you savored honeyed dates. All without raising your voice. Even now, the garden holds the memory of those meals, not in leftovers, but in air. The way it wraps around your arms as you stretch. The way the breeze finds your cheek. As if checking that you're still awake. You aren't quite sure if you are. But that's the point. The path ahead narrows again. Lined on both sides with low hedges and lavender bushes brushing your fingertips. The garden is quieter here. Like it knows you're digesting something, not food, but mood. The banquets are behind you now. And what stretches ahead is diplomacy. Just as carefully plated, just as fragrant. You step into a smaller courtyard bordered with cypress and orange trees. Their trunks leaning slightly inward as if eavesdropping. This was once the garden of an envoy. A space where foreign visitors were received not in cold halls, but among warm breezes and trickling fountains. You might think it an odd place to discuss matters of empire. That's because you've never tried to argue with someone while sitting on a silk cushion. Feet in a cold stream. Holding a cup of rose sherbet. Turns out, it's much harder to raise your voice when there's honeysuckle in the air. You take a seat near the edge of a reflecting pool. The surface mirrors the sky so clearly it startles you. For a moment, you feel like you're about to fall upward. Here, garden design became international relations. Persian nobles, keen to impress visiting dignitaries, treated these green spaces as both symbol and strategy. The Ottoman diplomats admired the geometry. The Mughal visitors took notes. And eventually, those designs rippled outward, shaping gardens from India to Andalusia. Historians still debate how much influence Persian garden design had on later Islamic and European garden traditions. Was it copied directly? Adapted? Inspired? The truth is slippery, like water running through fingers. But the echoes are there. The cross-shaped layouts, the love of scented pathways, even the obsession with symmetrical trees. Those didn't bloom by coincidence. You rise and stroll past a row of citrus trees. Their fruits glowing like paper lanterns. A stone bench holds the engraving of a lion reclining beside a peacock. Not fierce, just resting. Above them, a line of poetry in Persian script curls around the edge, where there is shade and silence. Truth can grow. One particular diplomatic meeting, now lost in the margins of history, once took place in a garden just like this. The Shah of Persia hosted a delegation from the Deccan Sultanates. The official topic, trade. The real goal? To find out who made the better quince jam. Neither side won, officially, but one scribe recorded that the visitors departed with heavy bags and light spirits. Which is all any host can hope for. You turn down another corridor and pass a long table, low to the ground, ringed by stools made of woven rush. You imagine a gathering of quiet power brokers here, men and women who spoke in gestures more than declarations. Who made decisions by sharing fruit slices. In the center of the table lies a ceramic plate, chipped but intact. On it, the remnants of pistachio shells. As if the conversation paused only recently. A fig branch stretches overhead. You feel, again, like you've walked into the memory of something. A soft wind coils around you, almost mischievously. It's changed direction again, drawn not by accident, but design. You glance upward and see the vent slits of yet another windcatcher. Angled perfectly toward the courtyard. Every whisper of this garden, every sigh of air, seems to say, you're being gently managed. And the guests never even noticed. That was the point. One architect, nicknamed the Minister of Breezes, was famous for designing a garden so delicately balanced that no guest ever felt the same temperature twice in an evening. He calculated where the wind would arrive and when, and placed cushions accordingly. He also insisted on pairing each seating arrangement with a specific flower aroma, which made him both brilliant and impossible to have over for dinner. The garden begins to widen again. The pathways stretch towards small pavilions, where tired dignitaries might have napped between philosophical debates and melon slices. You pass under a wooden arch covered in climbing jasmine and enter one such space, open on 3 sides. Shaded by cedar, its floor tiled in blues and greens that make your feet feel cooler just by looking. You lie down. The air is still, not from lack of breeze, but because the breeze, apparently, has decided that you've earned a pause. And so, for now, you just breathe. You wake, if you ever truly slept, to the sound of something you can't place at first. It's not wind, not water, it's silence with intention. The kind of quiet that implies someone just stepped out of the room. Or just arrived. You sit up, stretch, and begin walking again, this time down a freshly swept path lined with small mosaic stones, black and white, set in flowing patterns that look like calligraphy learned from rivers. Around the bend, a new garden opens up, similar in shape to the ones before, but different in feeling. The plants are taller, the shade deeper. In the distance, marbled pavilions with pointed arches, faint strains of birdsong, and tiled domes that gleam just a bit more arrogantly than the ones behind you. You've crossed a border, without passports, without fanfare. This is a garden built elsewhere, not in Persia, but inspired by it. A Mughal retreat, perhaps, tucked into the hills of northern India. Or maybe a courtyard in Granada. The accents are local, the soul, Persian. Because the idea of the Persian garden didn't stay put. It traveled, dressed up, adapted its accent, and took root across continents. In India, it became the Charbagh gardens of the Mughals, formal, vast, and humming with imperial grandeur. In Spain, it slipped into the courtyards of Al-Andalus, winding through tiled fountains and orange groves under the watchful arches of the Alhambra. And everywhere it went, the garden retained its essence: water, geometry, shade, scent. You pause beneath a pomegranate tree, not the ones you've seen so far, but a fatter cousin with bright pink blooms and fruit like heavy lanterns. The path here divides sharply into 4. Another classic Shahar Bagh pattern, but this time, with local flair. Instead of roses, marigolds. Instead of cypress, tamarind. Historians still argue whether the transmission of garden ideas was direct or emergent, whether ambassadors brought back blueprints, or if the philosophy itself simply resonated wherever the air ran too hot and the rulers ran too ambitious. In some records, an Ottoman traveler describes entering a Persian-style garden in Cairo and bursting into tears, claiming it smelled like his grandfather's dreams. That traveler may have been very sentimental, or slightly dramatic, possibly both. You reach a low wall covered in painted tile, vivid blues and golds, with delicate white herons walking among reeds. A bench is built into the wall, shaped to catch the breeze just right. You sit again, realizing that even the imported versions of these gardens honored their core logic. Wind must be invited in, not pushed. Shade must be offered, not forced. Beauty must appear effortless, even if the gardener spent 3 hours shooing cats off the mint beds. A small fountain burbles nearby. Its water runs through a narrow stone channel set into the tile, curving gently around the seating area. You trace its path with your eyes and notice something peculiar. The flow of water aligns perfectly with a painted floral pattern, as if the two were choreographed to dance together. They probably were. One European ambassador, upon visiting such a garden, attempted to replicate it back home in France. He managed the geometry but couldn't quite get the scent right. Apparently, roses don't enjoy Parisian winters, nor do windcatchers enjoy chimneys. You step beyond the pavilion and find yourself in a narrower channel of space, walls creeping closer, plants reaching higher. It's a garden, still, but one adapted for urban life. The Persian garden philosophy didn't only travel across space, it changed scale. From imperial expanses to city courtyards to rooftop gardens, the spirit remained. Bring paradise to wherever you stand. You duck under a fig tree whose branches grow sideways, like they're reaching toward yesterday's breeze. The air smells of cardamom and lime. And for a moment, you forget which country you're supposed to be in, which is exactly what the designers wanted. The garden was never about one place. It was about an idea that could be carried, replanted, and whispered across borders, like a rumor, but gentler. You walk on, the path turning once more toward a low gate. Beyond it, who knows? But the scent of something familiar drifts through, a memory of the first garden. Of wind, and jasmine, and soft stone under your feet. The gate ahead is modest, just two wooden doors held in place by age and habit. Slightly uneven from centuries of swelling and shrinking in the dry heat. You push gently, and they creak open onto a quieter garden still. This one doesn't greet you with grandeur. It waits for you to notice it. It's smaller, simpler, but only at first glance. To your right, a row of squat trees shades a tidy path. You recognize pistachio, quince, and maybe something more aromatic, perhaps a curryleaf bush, planted by someone who had a more flavorful definition of ornamental. Low brick borders edge each plot. Between the shrubs, small bundles of copper tools hang on hooks hammered directly into the garden walls. This, clearly, is the staff quarter, the gardener's domain, not the ones who commissioned palaces or designed star-aligning courtyards. These were the folks who kept everything breathing. You walk slowly along the row, peering into small alcoves. There's a broom made of dried reeds leaning against a fig tree. A chipped jug painted with flowers. A faded note in calligraphy tied to a branch with twine. You lean in closer. It reads, "Do not trim jasmine until the second moon." There's a small doodle of a sleepy goat in the corner. Official documentation? Hard to say. Meet the garden staff. Unnamed in records, but unmistakably present. They were the quiet magicians who used copper combs to clean moss from between tiles. Who brewed pest repellents from vinegar, garlic, and bitter pomegranate skins. Who replaced cracked tiles with new ones, blending the glaze just enough to make the repair feel like part of the aging process. One especially poetic record mentions that an old gardener in Shiraz refused to use any plant that didn't smell polite. What qualified as polite? Lavender? Yes. Garlic? No. Marigold? Debatable. You pause beside a basket of what looks like oddly shaped bells. They're bird scarers, rattles strung with tiny pieces of metal, meant to jingle softly in the wind and discourage peckish crows. One is still ringing faintly, as if trying to keep working despite retirement. There's also a watering device nearby, a porous ceramic jar buried halfway in the soil. A kind of ancient drip irrigation. Fill it in the morning, and the water seeps out slowly all day, nourishing roots while keeping the surface dry and neat. Smart, quiet, kind of smug, in a good way. Historians still argue whether garden maintenance in Persian estates was centralized or familial, whether large households had salaried crews, or if whole extended families took turns by custom and duty. Some suggest that even minor nobles had garden teams as specialized as a modern spa resort. Others argue that most of it was done by a few stubborn caretakers with excellent hats. You turn a corner and enter a shaded nook filled with clay jars. Most sealed, some open. A chalkboard leans nearby with faded writing. It seems to list which mixtures go where. Rosewater for scenting paths. Vinegar for pest control. Fig milk for, well, fig milk probably wasn't for pest control. But let's not rule it out. A leather-bound journal sits on a low table, open to a page showing a diagram of the garden, hand-drawn, with notes like, prone to overwatering, sparrows nest here, and a cryptic line next to the cypress. Only sings in September. You lean back, absorbing the strange peace of this space. There are no windcatchers here. No great fountains. Just the slow rhythm of tending. Of keeping things upright, alive, and balanced. The garden's designers may have dreamed it, but the staff kept it awake. You spot a cat again. Maybe the same one. It stares at you with faint disdain, then hops onto a sun-warmed bench, curls into a circle, and promptly begins a nap. It is, perhaps, the truest heir to this garden. A final detail catches your eye, a small clay bell hanging from a low branch, swaying in the breeze. On it is etched a single word in Persian, saber. Patience. Seems like a job requirement. You leave the quiet hum of the gardener's space and re-enter the more curated part of the garden, though after seeing the copper combs and hand-drawn route maps, you no longer trust the word natural in any context here. Everything feels designed, but never sterile, like someone spent their whole life making it look effortless. The breeze is back, though softer now. It rustles a set of cypress trees that line the next walkway like green exclamation marks. Just ahead, half hidden by ivy and suspiciously unlabeled, is a small iron gate. It isn't locked. Of course you push it open. The moment you do, the atmosphere changes. Gone are the wide open paths. This is a hidden garden within the garden. Tighter, shadier, wrapped in walls of climbing rose and bitter orange. A fountain trickles somewhere nearby, but you can't see it. The sound echoes oddly, as if bouncing off stone in careful patterns. You step through a second arch, and there it is, a private observatory courtyard, built centuries ago by an astrologer with a flair for horticulture and a dangerous amount of free time. He wasn't royal. He wasn't even officially on staff. He just happened to be charming, brilliant, and incredibly persuasive about the need to align the night-blooming jasmine with the position of Saturn. He designed the garden himself, small, square, sunken slightly to catch cool air, and filled with plants that responded to time more than temperature. There are moonflowers, evening primrose, tuberose, and an odd little plant that only releases scent after midnight, as if on a dare. Above you, the walls rise higher than usual, topped with stone latticework shaped like stars and crescents. These weren't decorative. They filtered light in precise patterns that let the astrologer track celestial movement without ever leaving his garden. Historians still argue whether this garden was truly used for astronomy or just for bragging rights. Some claim the irrigation channels double as star maps, with the water flowing along constellations. Others argue that's poetic nonsense. The truth? Possibly both. Probably both. A polished bronze disc still rests on a stone pedestal in the middle of the courtyard. You brush your fingers across it. It's cool to the touch. Even now, around the edges, tiny markers show planetary symbols, the 12 signs, and several notations that seem to reference, well, naps. One is labeled, ideal hour for post-lunch recline beneath fig. You can't help smiling. The man knew his priorities. You walk the courtyard slowly. Everything here is intentional. The walls reflect sound, guiding bird calls into echoing loops. The vines were trained to open just enough to let moonlight through on specific nights. Even the bench you're currently eyeing is set at a slant, not a flaw, but a calculated angle to catch both starlight and the breeze from the vented wall just opposite. There's a story, likely apocryphal, but delicious nonetheless, that this astrologer once hosted a prince who arrived late and missed the scheduled moonrise through the cypress canopy. The astrologer politely rescheduled the entire garden's lighting sequence, including candle positions and reflective water angles. The prince, reportedly, called it the most restful humiliation of my life. You sit on the bench. It's stone warm from the day but cooling quickly. Above, the stars are beginning to appear. You realize you're not in a garden anymore. You're in a timepiece, a living clock of scent and shadow. To your left, a narrow channel of water cuts through the tiles. At first, it seems ordinary, but look again, it's shaped like a crescent. And where it curves, jasmine vines arch over it like constellations in bloom. A cat, not the same one, surely, and yet, steps delicately across the star map and settles in a corner. You think, for a second, you see it glance upward, following the path of Mars. Or maybe just a moth. And then, as if the air itself nods in agreement, the wind returns, not strong, not pushy, but enough to make the night-blooming flowers begin their quiet chorus. You lean back and let the stars flicker through the leaves. It's all working. Still, the wind trails behind you like a curious servant as you leave the astrologer's sanctuary. You pass once again under that low stone arch, stepping into a garden space that feels less calculated, more lived in, a different kind of balance. Here, the plants lean toward comfort over precision. The paths are slightly overgrown. Moss creeps in along the edges of the tile like it's been invited to stay for tea. There's a cat asleep on a folded carpet that may or may not belong to anyone. And to your immense relief, no one seems bothered. You're in the courtyard garden of the household proper now, a domestic space, where people napped, gossiped, played games, drank tea, and didn't always use coasters. It's cozy, not ceremonial. And oh, it smells fantastic. Cardamom, cumin, tarragon, and a kind of honeyed cinnamon hang in the air, mixing with fresh linen and warm clay. Someone must have cooked recently. Possibly still is. A small table nearby is covered in crumbs and mint leaves, as if someone just got up to stretch and forgot to return. Or was spirited away by an argument over rosewater ratios. This courtyard was designed not by architects or astrologers, but likely by the household itself. Women, children, cooks, old uncles with too much advice and not enough shoes. Everyone added something. A pot of basil here. A cracked mirror set behind the fountain to catch light. A hanging cage that once held a bird, now used for drying herbs. Historians still debate the exact influence of women in Persian domestic gardens. There are few written records, but plenty of architectural cues, half-doors for privacy, shade screens for modesty, and flower choices based on meaning, not just smell. A courtyard like this was a stage for family life, for whispered complaints and slow afternoons. A rug lies across the tile, its edges curling slightly from use. You step onto it, barefoot, and realize it's covering a series of cooling vents, slits in the tile that connect to a channel below. Another wind-guiding trick. It's not as dramatic as a windcatcher, but it works. Quiet air sighs up through the gaps, lifting the corners of the rug like a deep exhale. A young servant, long forgotten but once referred to as the cat herder, allegedly invented this setup. She grew tired of chasing overheated kittens into the kitchen and dug the vents so they'd nap in the courtyard instead. It worked. It also caught on, and was soon credited to someone with a more official title. Naturally, there's a water jar sitting in the shade, shaped like a teardrop, beaded with condensation. You lift the lid and pour a little into a shallow bowl beside the rug. Instantly, 3 birds flutter down from a vine-covered beam and begin sipping. One pauses and gives you the kind of look birds reserve for people who interrupt drinks with movement. You back away respectfully. Beyond the carpeted space, you find a series of alcoves, some open, some curtained. Cushions lie scattered around a narrow marble ledge where family members once reclined during the heat of the day. A few hand fans made from woven palm fronds rest nearby. And in the corner, a large, lazy orange cat. You lock eyes. It blinks once, slowly, then resumes its nap like a professional. You don't want to disturb anything. Even time seems to be lying down here. A vine of jasmine has crept through a broken tile, climbing up toward a beam wrapped in cotton fabric. Someone's scarf, long abandoned, or maybe a gift to the wind. The whole courtyard feels like it's humming, not from sound, but from memory. Every corner hums with stories, unrecorded but embedded in fabric, in shadow, in how the breeze curves before reaching your cheek. You sit on one of the cushions, letting your fingers trail along the smooth, cool marble edge of the ledge. It's been polished by elbows, tea bowls, and the occasional napper's foot. The wind picks up again, just a little, enough to ruffle the scarf, stir the mint, and make you believe, if only briefly, that the garden is breathing with you. And maybe it is. You rise slowly from the cushion, leaving the courtyard's soft lull behind. The air, ever your quiet companion, urges you gently onward, toward a narrow arched doorway framed in chipped blue tile. As you pass through, you notice the script etched faintly along its edge, where the wind enters. Thought begins. Appropriate, given where you're heading next. This part of the estate feels borrowed. The tile is newer, but trying very hard not to look it. The proportions are off, taller ceilings, narrower windows, and a suspiciously European-looking bench that seems confused to be here. You've entered a chapter of the garden that isn't entirely Persian. It's the echo of the world trying to copy paradise. By the 17th century, whispers of Persian gardens had drifted across continents. Western architects and travelers were fascinated. They scribbled in notebooks, tried to sketch the proportions of the windcatchers, and measured the fountains like they were deciphering a spell. Then they went home and built things that were close-ish. You step into a long hallway with open archways on both sides. It's a kind of hybrid loggia, clearly inspired by the Persian tradition, but overdecorated, too much scrollwork, not enough restraint. The water channels are too shallow to whisper. The breeze here has no idea where to go. Still, it's charming in its own way. An earnest attempt. You pause beside a wall mural depicting a Shahar Bagh layout, but flipped, mirrored, and oddly labeled in French. A lavender bush has been drawn in where a fig tree should be. The fountain is shaped like a scallop. Someone, somewhere, meant well. Historians still argue how faithfully European versions of Persian gardens followed their originals. Some say the essential elements, shade, water, balance, were preserved. Others argue they became over-theatrical, stripped of their soul and transformed into aristocratic stage sets. Both views, likely, are correct in parts. One documented example, a garden built by a wealthy merchant in Venice, featured imported jasmine, marble walkways, and even a scaled-down windcatcher that failed spectacularly during a summer storm, sucking in not breeze but several dozen leaves, one angry pigeon, and most of the owner's dignity. You walk past a faded map pinned to a board, an attempted garden plan labeled, inspired by Shiraz. There's an arrow pointing to a corner marked, Rose Scent Zone, pending. Another reads, Install quiet fountain, urgent, underlined 3 times. You can't help but grin. Even when misunderstood, Persian garden philosophy stirred something deep in foreign hearts, a longing for calmness, order, and beauty without excess. That longing sometimes resulted in masterpieces, sometimes in architectural head-scratchers, but always in earnest homage. Beyond the corridor, you enter a courtyard that appears to have been remodeled recently. The tiles are pristine, but the proportions are awkward. The water basin is too high to reflect anything but knees. The trees are too close to the walls. The breeze gets stuck trying to decide which way to travel. Yet even here, the idea survives. In one corner, a bench is placed just right. A lemon tree leans slightly to shade it. The sunlight filters down in lace-like patterns through a wooden pergola. And the breeze, clever creature that it is, finds a way to curve around a plaster column and drift gently over the bench's surface. You sit. The air moves. A cat, again, wanders in from the side. This one is white, with a single gray smudge between its ears like a misplaced thumbprint. It pauses, considers you, then hops onto the bench's far end. Together, you share the breeze. For all the missteps in replication, there is still grace here. Because Persian gardens, it turns out, aren't about the exact math. They're about the feeling, about designing air, about placing scent like punctuation, about knowing that sometimes, the most important path is the one that curves slightly, just enough to make you pause. You lean back against the bench, eyes half closed, as the sun slips lower and the air thickens with that golden scent only dusk can make. The cat yawns. You do too. Somewhere nearby, water drips with casual perfection. It's working. Even here, you rise from the bench with a familiar slowness now, less from fatigue, more from reluctance to interrupt whatever ancient rhythm you've settled into. The garden seems to nod with you, acknowledging your movement with a whisper of leaves and the faint clink of a wind chime in the distance. This next space, further down the tiled path, is quieter still. Not by design, but by time. The plaster is peeling. Vines grow without permission. A cypress tree leans against a cracked wall as if propping it up out of habit. You've stepped into the part of the garden most visitors don't see, the portion that has slipped gently into decay. But even decay feels graceful here. Dust coats the tiles in elegant patterns. The water in the basin is murky but not stagnant. It reflects the sky in smudged brushstrokes, like a memory trying to stay awake. You pause beside a stone ledge where someone long ago carved a date, year 1215 in the Hijri calendar. That's around 1800-something to you. The script is shaky. Perhaps the stonecutter was old, or in a hurry, or both. This garden corner once held a pavilion. You can still see the foundation lines, the edges where the walls once met the earth in neat corners. Now, only fragments remain, a broken column base, a scattering of roof tiles, and a single beam lying flat on the ground, worn smooth by sun and wind. Historians still argue whether this section was intentionally abandoned to nature as a statement on impermanence, or simply left untended due to budget cuts and garden politics. One source suggests a dispute over tulip bulbs led to a hasty walkout by the head gardener, who refused to return unless his personal windcatcher design was reinstated. No one blinked. He left. The vines arrived. You bend to touch a stone tile, half covered in lichen. Beneath it, a faint symbol, a lotus, or maybe a pomegranate blossom. Hard to tell. Nature is painting over the old geometry with her own palette now. But here's what's odd. The air is still cool. The vents, though chipped, still guide the breeze. The shade still falls exactly where it should. The bones of the garden hold. That's the quiet brilliance of Persian design, it endures. Even in retreat. Especially in retreat. In one corner, a patch of wild chamomile has taken over what used to be a seating area. The little blossoms nod as you pass. Like polite squatters, you take a seat on a fallen stone, which obliges with surprising comfort. It must remember how to support someone. The decay isn't sad. It's just sleepy. The garden is resting, not gone. A nightingale sings somewhere high up in the overgrown canopy. Not loudly, just enough to say, "I'm still here." You notice other signs of persistence too. A cracked pot with new shoots spilling out. An abandoned irrigation channel still wet at its edges. A rusted lantern filled with spider silk and early morning light. You begin walking again, slower than before, not wanting to disturb anything that hasn't moved in years. And then, around one final corner, something catches your eye. A gardener. Not ancient, not imagined, a real one, young. With sleeves rolled and a quiet patience in their eyes. They kneel in the soil, coaxing a stubborn vine onto a trellis that's barely holding together. You pause. They nod. No words. Just the shared understanding of two people who have fallen under the same garden spell. It's not being restored. Not yet. Not officially. But someone is beginning again. You leave them to their work and continue on. At the end of the path, a new tree has been planted. Not full grown. Not manicured. Just a sapling, staked carefully. Its young leaves fluttering like a shy hello. It leans slightly. Not imperfect, just starting. The wind swirls gently around its base. Testing the new space. Learning its path again. The garden breathes in. You exhale. Still working. You walk on. Your footsteps now muffled by packed earth softened from centuries of weather and whispers. The garden has grown darker. But not ominous. The sky above you melts into violet and deep indigo. Stars starting to blink awake like lanterns strung across an invisible ceiling. This final stretch isn't marked by grandeur. There's no gate, no tower, no clever inscription, just a curved path that arcs around a sleeping grove of jasmine and myrtle, leading you to a low bench placed not at the garden's center, but at its heart. You sit. Before you, a shallow channel of water. Almost still. Just enough motion to ripple the moon's reflection. Above you, branches heavy with white blossoms that only opened in the last hour. Their scent so soft it makes you want to breathe slower. This is the part of the garden that speaks last. The place designed not for guests. Not for royals or scholars or poets, but for the soul. A private corner where the only audience is time. And maybe, just maybe, a nightingale. It sings again. Not a song. Really, just a line. Like it's remembering something out loud. Or humming itself to sleep. You lean back. The stone of the bench is cool now. The kind of cool that has forgotten the sun. The breeze arrives again. Not as architecture but as presence. You don't think about it anymore. It's just there. Like breath. The garden has done its work. It has pulled you into its rhythm. Rewound your thoughts. Pressed pause on all the noise you didn't realize you carried. Somewhere behind you, another channel gurgles. Somewhere ahead, a cat pads silently across a ledge. A fig falls from a tree and lands without sound. You trace your fingers along the tile beside you. Each line, each chip, each faded paint stroke feels intentional. Even erosion here feels designed. Historians still argue over who built the first Persian garden. They argue about who owned them, who walked through them, who wrote poems beneath their boughs. But no one argues what they were for. They were for this. For the breeze that finds you at just the right moment. For the scent that arrives before you can name it. For the silence that finally makes sense. You close your eyes. And the garden, ancient and eternal, wraps around you one last time. Now, as the stars settle overhead and the breeze curls like a ribbon through the sleeping trees. You feel your breath slowing. Your shoulders soften. The tension in your jaw unknots. Quietly, without needing to be asked. The garden doesn't disappear, it fades gently. Like a room dimming its lights without touching the switch. The path behind you stretches far. Lined with voices and vanished footsteps. 1,000 gardeners who never knew your name. But somehow shaped your dreams anyway. Their hands worked the soil. Adjusted the windcatchers. Scented the water, not for legacy. But for balance. You inhale once more. And the air tastes like still water and warm stone. The branches overhead sway in a hush. Not from effort, but from memory. Everything here breathes with you. And maybe tomorrow, or the day after, someone will sit where you sat. Wonder what you heard. Imagine your thoughts drifting across the water, riding the same breeze that cooled a prince's cheek, or scattered a poet's ink, or rocked a jasmine blossom into bloom. But for now, there's nothing to do, nowhere to go. Just lie still. Let the scent of myrtle keep you company. Let the soft shuffle of a passing cat remind you that peace often has pause. Let the air do what it was always meant to do: cool, carry, calm, let go. You are here. You are exactly where the wind meant to leave you.